Hey team, exercise of the week. This week it is a 3-for-1. So this is inspired by a question from Hugo about how do we generate tension in a hamstring that might be hypermobile. So we're going to start with one which is probably a variation of something that many of you will have done as a kid, an old school foot elevated hamstring stretch. So we just got our foot up and we're reaching forwards, hinging at the hip. So we hopefully get a nice bit of stretch. We could load this up to develop strength through this range. Nice pulse stretches to activate the muscle at the same time as lengthening it. However, this does come with some drawbacks. If somebody is not used to getting into their hamstring, they don't have the skill of using the hamstring length to decelerate this motion, there is the opportunity to make up the movement through spinal flexion. Nice little nip slip there. And a lot of people will do this if they're tight or even if they're super loose. If the goal is just to get your hands to your foot, your body will find a way in whatever it finds most readily available. So if you're used to flexing at the spine, you might not flex at the hip as much, you might not tilt your pelvis, which means the hamstring doesn't actually lengthen that much and it doesn't activate. So what we're going to go through today is a couple of options for how you might try to encourage the work to be done by the hamstring instead of some glute, some lower back and even some upper back. So variation number one is just sticking your hands overhead. So this is something we cover a lot in the mentorship, which is the concept of tweaking in and tweaking out muscles. So how can we use the same movement but block somewhat the opportunity for the back muscles to perform the movement? So how can we reduce the amount of spinal flexion, which means we should get more hip flexion, and just by keeping the hands overhead, trying to maintain alignment between the hands, the shoulders and the hips, a relatively straight spine. You can see the range is shut down a lot compared to the previous version because it's just as close to pure hip flexion as possible. Obviously some people will still flex a little bit, but it will become very obvious if they are rounding the spine, because you'll lose this nice straight line between the hands, shoulders and hips. As you can see, I'm losing it already here. You can hold a PVC, you can hold a weight plate overhead if you want to load this up as well to generate even more tension in the muscle. Number three, this is coming at it from a slightly different angle. So rather than focusing on folding the torso forward, we're focusing on flexing the hip. So targeting the muscle from the opposite direction, and we call this a single leg squat with the hamstring bias. So we've got foot on a bench here, and rather than folding over at the top, we're squatting down with the other leg. So we're dropping into the hip flexion with minimal change from the top part of the body, from the upper body. So in this way, we're essentially finding what I call backdoor access to the muscle. How can we find a way to teach this muscle to lengthen and shorten with a bit of load whilst blocking the opportunity for compensation patterns, or not even necessarily a compensation pattern, just a different movement strategy to take over? Because at the end of the day, the body is a team. So when we are folding forwards, we're trying to create flexion in most of our joints. So it's up to us how we allocate that flexion across the posterior chain. And if we have identified through assessment that not enough is coming from the hamstring, too much is coming from the back, then these are a couple of options for how to play with it. Give them all a go. Feel free to upload a video to the school discussion board as always and see how they feel, and notice how even those subtle tweaks can significantly change the amount of stretch, the amount of range available, because you'll see what's coming from the hamstring on its own versus the hamstring, more glute, more lower back, and some upper back as well. But hope that was useful, guys. Let me know if it was. Let me know if you have a movement request as well. Always want to make these as useful as possible for you. But otherwise, yeah, please check out the other exercise of the weeks and the movement library on YouTube. We've got over 600 exercises just like this, which will hopefully inspire your training and your treatment for your clients and athletes. Have a great day. Speak to you next week.